Tag security is actually split into two different issues. The first issue is who has access to the configuration of the tag. Now by configuration we're talking about things like the description of the tag or the zero and span of the tag. We're not talking about the data that's associated with the tag just yet. There's a second thing that we can control, and that is access to the data associated with the tag. So again, the first issue is who has access to the configuration of the tag. The second issue is who has access to the data that is associated with that particular tag. Now, we do that using a couple of fairly straightforward concepts that you may have seen in other systems like Pi. We associate with each tag an owner, and we can also associate a group of users who are associated with that. And then anybody who is not in those two groups, is known as the world. So anybody who is not the owner or not in the group basically has world access. Now we do this concept for both the point configuration and the data. So you'll notice with point configuration we have something we call a point owner. Okay. We also have a point group, and then finally we have something called point access. We'll talk a little bit more about point access in a few minutes, but that basically defines what the owner and the group can do. So now compare that to the data owner. Every Pi tag has a data owner. It has a data group. That's the group of users associated with the tag. And then finally there is an attribute called data access, and data access basically specifies what the owner and the group and the rest of the world can do. So let's look at where you would find these configured, and then we'll dig into the actual definitions and how they work. So let's first of all just make sure we all know what we're talking about first. We're talking about looking at a tag using a tool like the point builder and looking at its attributes. So I'll look at a tag called sinusoid, which we use in training. And if I go into the security settings, you can see that it has a data owner and a data group of PyAdmin. That is, PyAdmin is the name of the user, and in data group is the name of the group that's associated with this. Now that doesn't really tell us anything until we look at the permissions. What does the owner get to do? And as you can see, the owner has read-write access. The members of the group have read-write access. And in this case, this Pi tag, the world has read-write access. Now that's a little liberal. That would allow everybody access to this tag. Let's take a look at a tag that's not so liberally defined. Now I'm going to type in the name of the tag that I created earlier. It was simply called first tag. And if we look at its security, again, the data owner is PyAdmin, the data group is PyAdmin as well. Remember, this is a group as well as a username. That's why it looks a little confusing. And in this particular tag, if you notice, the owner has read-write access, but the group has read-only access, and so does the world. And that's typical of a Pi tag. When you create a Pi tag, the owner is PyAdmin, the group is PyAdmin, and it's only the owner who has read-write access. Now we'll talk a little bit about this when we do our exercise, but this specifically gives PyAdmin access to the data associated with the tag. And in addition to the data, we also have control over the access to the point configuration, and that's handled through this over here, the point access. Now let's take a look at a different application and a different way that we can actually look at this information. Here's a different way of editing a Pi tag. Let me import the tag from the Pi server, and as you can see, it's the same information, just displayed a little differently. Here we're seeing the owner is PyAdmin, the point group, that's the group associated with it, is PyAdmin, and point access, this specifies what the owner can do. The owner has read-write. What the group can do, the group has read-write, and what the world can do. In this case, the world has read-write. Now compare that to, let me bring in first tag, and I will import this from the server. Now take a look at this, slightly different. The owner and group are the same, that's the default, but look at point access. This defines who has access to editing the point, and we see here only the owner has read-write access. The group has read access, and the world has read access. Here's a quick summary. There are 3 different attributes that control access to the configuration of a tag, and those 3 attributes are who is the owner, who is what is the group of users that is associated with that tag, and then finally what is in fact the access that's defined. And that access is defined by an attribute called point access. And as you can see, that's where we specify the 3 things. That's where we specify what this point owner can do. So you can see the owner has read-write. That's where we also specify what the group can do. The point group is specified with this group. And that also is where we specify what the world can do. The world is somebody who is not the owner and not in the group. And we can specify that in multiple places. We can specify that simply by going and editing the tag one at a time using the point builder, or in something like Excel, we can specify those things en masse and do massive edits. Now a couple of other points about this. You should notice that, or you should be aware that a pi tag can be associated only with a single group. If you were to look at this builder here, you notice there is no place to associate this tag with multiple groups. It's a single group. Also, a user can belong to many groups. So the way you would handle your security needs is essentially by giving people membership in groups. That's how you give access to certain tags. Again, if you can think of the analogy of a user with lots of keys, by giving people membership to groups, he's going to have more doors he can open. And since a pi tag is going to be behind one of those doors, in other words, associated with one of those groups, then people who belong to more than one group can generally look at more things. And finally, you should know that we will always grant whatever is the less restrictive access right. So let's, for example, say that, it's kind of a strange example, but let's say that a person belongs to a group, the pi admin group, but in fact the group only has read access, but the world has read-write access. If that were the situation, then we would simply give, since everybody is a member of the world, we would give everybody read-write access, even if they are in that group. So we grant the less restrictive. Now, later on in an exercise, we're going to go over all this in great detail, so don't worry if you're not getting it just yet. Wait till the exercise, and we'll go over it in much, much better detail. I do want to point out that there are some kind of standard error messages that you're typically going to see surrounding security. Whenever you see these -10.400 or 401 errors, those are typically error messages associated with security. And if I'm trying to write to a value, for example, and I don't have access to it, I'll get that no write access. Incidentally, the way you translate that is to use this pidiag-e. And let's just go over that real briefly. I'm going to go ahead and choose Run Command. And this is going to bring up a command prompt. I'm going to change directory to the pi/adm directory, and I'll do a pidiag-e. E stands for error message, and then I type in the name of the error, -10.401. As you can see, it flags that as the no write access. So that's how you would translate those error messages.